The probe fit everything we put it through. That was the whole point. I had run Project Sheath for 11 years before we sent it across the line. 11 years of refinement, of growing the outer membrane layer by layer in the culture vats, of calibrating its adaptive matrix until it could mimic the thermal signature of bare rock, the electromagnetic profile of a derelict hull, the pressure gradient of a cave system on a border world. It was not a ship. It was not a drone. It was a living garment. You told it the shape of the space you needed it to enter, and it became that shape. Perfectly. Without seam. The doctrine said stay back. The doctrine had always said stay back. I had read it twice and filed my variance request 3 separate times over 7 years, and on the third submission the directorate approved it because the logic was sound. We were not sending weapons. We were not sending signals. We were sending something that would pass through human space the way a shadow passes through a room, unnoticed, conformed, unremarkable. The probe would take atmospheric samples from the near boundary worlds, map the sensor architecture in the outer sectors, and return in 72 standard hours. It had no weapons. It had no communications array. It could not signal and could not be signaled. It was a skin, not a mind. We had run the same operation inside 4 other restricted zones across the arm. It had never failed. I was at my station on the command floor when it crossed. The telemetry flatlined at the boundary, expected, by design, because we had calibrated it to shed every active emission the moment it transited, and then there was nothing to track for 72 hours. My team ran their routine calibrations. 2 of them slept in shifts. I reviewed the atmospheric model projections and approved the follow-on phase proposal, already assuming a successful return. I was planning past this mission. Planning the second insertion, deeper in, targeting the mid-sector relay array at the edge of the mapped human worlds. The probe came back on schedule. To the minute. We tracked it on passive sensors from 40,000 kilometers out. Hull temperature nominal. Mass nominal. Drive profile identical to its outbound signature, the same slow, even burn we had programmed for transit, nothing accelerated, nothing irregular. My chief materials analyst, Keth Savrin, pulled the membrane integrity readings and told me everything looked clean. I told her to prep the recovery bay and bring it into containment under standard protocol, the vacuum-sealed anteroom, the full atmosphere scrub cycle, the spectral sweep before any personnel contact. The spectral sweep came back clean. That was the first thing that should have stopped us. The probe had been inside human space for 72 hours. Nothing in human space leaves a clean spectral sweep. Every world in that region carries the residue of long human occupancy, chemical markers in the upper atmosphere, electromagnetic saturation from 1,000 years of active infrastructure, the biological trace that living systems leave on the air and stone and water around them. The probe should have come back carrying the chemical signature of every world it had skimmed. It should have been saturated. It came back wearing nothing. As if it had been nowhere at all. As if whatever it had moved through had cleaned it before letting it go. Savrin noticed. She flagged it in her log. I read that log later, after everything else. She wrote, reading suggests outer membrane has been fully refreshed, query whether probe entered the zone at all or held position at boundary. She did not escalate the flag. She did not come across the floor and say what she had written. She cleared the probe for inner containment and sent in the intake team. There were 4 of them. 2 membrane technicians, 1 atmospheric chemist, and the intake supervisor, a veteran named Orendal who had processed 62 previous recoveries across 3 different classified programs without a single incident report. I watched on the bay feed. Orendal keyed the inner door. The probe was standing in the center of the room. That was not how we had designed it. In transit posture, the probe was a compressed form, roughly ovoid, dense, folded back on itself to occupy minimum volume. It did not stand. It did not have a posture. It was a skin, not a frame. What was in that room had a frame. Something inside it was holding a shape it had not had when it left. Holding the shape with a stillness that was not inertia. A stillness that was attention. Orendal took one step inside the room. He stopped. He said something to the membrane technician behind him. The feed carried no audio and I could only watch his mouth move. Then he stepped back and pulled the inner door closed himself, unhurried, both hands flat against the seal as if he needed to feel that it had held. I was across the floor in seconds. He would not look at me. I asked him what he had seen. He said that the membrane layer had not been refreshed after all. Savrin's reading had been wrong, or what the sweep had detected was not absence. The probe was still saturated. Just not with anything in our reference catalog. Not with anything he had a word for. I asked him what word he would use if he had to. He thought about it for a moment. Then he said, something that knew it was being looked at, and had decided it did not mind. I sent Orendal home. He asked me not to log where he had gone and I told him I would not. I do not know if he went home. I have not found his name in any directory since this record was begun, and I stopped looking after the second day because the looking felt like the wrong kind of attention to draw. We sealed the bay. I cleared the floor. I held the floor alone for 17 minutes before my nerve held and I went back to the bay feed, because I needed to know whether it was still standing or whether something had changed. It was still standing. It had not moved. But in the 17 minutes I had spent outside the room it had turned, very slightly, so that it was facing the feed unit mounted in the upper corner of the containment cell. It was facing the lens. It had not been facing the lens before. I closed the feed. I sent the uplink to the Directorate Senior Board and requested an emergency classification review, and while I waited for their response I went back to the feed and watched the probe stand in the center of the containment room for 4 hours without moving. It did not approach the door. It did not do anything that could be called behavior. It stood in the posture it had assumed and held it with the patience of something that understood patience differently than we do, not endurance, not waiting for a better moment, but the patience of something that does not experience the passing of time as a cost at all. The Directorate responded with a full-stop order. Not a pause. Not a review protocol. A full-stop order of the kind the Directorate reserves for catastrophic contamination events, the kind I had only ever seen applied twice before in my career and never to a project I ran. Project Sheath was classified beyond access before the end of the day shift. My personnel files were stripped of any reference to 11 years of development work. Savrin's atmospheric logs were sealed. Orendal's incident statement was sealed. Every membrane culture, every calibration record, every variance request I had ever filed, sealed. I was given 48 hours to produce this debrief. I was told it would be the last record of the program, and that it would be sealed with the rest. I am writing it now, and I will say plainly what the sealed files will not say plainly. The Directorate's response took 11 minutes from my uplink to their full-stop order. 11 minutes to classify a decade of work, reassign a staff of 31, and issue a permanent containment directive. They did not deliberate. They did not convene a review board. They moved in 11 minutes because they already knew what category of thing we had sent back. They had a category for it. They had simply never told us. The probe is still in containment. I do not know if anyone has gone back to the bay feed. I have not, since I wrote Orendal's name in this report and remembered the way he stood with both hands against the sealed door, not pressing it shut, just resting there, making sure. The doctrine said stay back. The doctrine was written by people who understood something I had taken for bureaucratic caution and now understand was arithmetic. Whatever human space does to the things that enter it, it does thoroughly, and it does not hurry. The probe was inside for 72 hours. 72 hours was enough. I will submit this record. The cell will stay sealed. I will not file a fourth variance request.